Hi, I'm Malika Khoury from the Machine Learning team of Interlight Labs. Today, I will present our work on data-driven approach to differentiating between depression and dementia from noisy speech and language data. Depressive disorder and dementia are clinical conditions that both impose a substantial cost globally in terms of mortality and morbidity and have a significant negative impact on social and economic productivity. Distinguishing between these conditions has proven to be a challenging task as they frequently co-occur and have many overlapping symptoms such as changes in sleep patterns and concentration issues. However, depression is generally curable by either psychotherapy or medication, while dementia is a neurodegenerative disease which is caused by irreversible deterioration of the nervous system. Therefore, it is crucial to differentiate between these two conditions. Previous studies indicated that machine learning methods and speech analysis are useful in detecting dementia or depression. However, the studies on discriminating depression from dementia are rare. There are three main limitations in prior studies. Firstly, the datasets used in previous studies had low variety in terms of the demographic distributions, data collection procedures, and disease types. Secondly, to the best of our knowledge, previous studies have only used classification approaches to detect AD from HC, depression from HC, or AD from depression using the speech. And lastly, they did not make a strong conclusion about the main distinguishing speech-based symptoms between dementia and depression. To address the data variety limitation, we created a novel aggregated superset of the datasets listed in this table that contains the speech recordings of English-speaking participants elicited through picture description task. The dataset comprises AD, MCI, depression, and HC labels. And then we measured over 500 acoustic and linguistic features from the audio files and the associated transcripts. We classified these features into different categories in line with the clinical symptoms of these diseases. We applied linear and nonlinear dimensionality reduction approaches to reduce the original feature space to a low-dimensional space. To explore linear approaches, we used PCA and LDA, and as for the nonlinear techniques, we used UMAP and t-SNE methods. Then we clustered the low-dimensional samples by k-means clusterings, and clusters were meant to represent groups associated with data labels HC, AD, MCI, and depression. We compared the performance of the dimensionality reduction techniques according to their optimal number of k-means clusters and silhouette score. The third column of the table represents whether the optimal number of clusters in k-means clustering is equal to the original number of diagnosis labels in our datasets, which is our ideal case. Based on our findings, nonlinear clustering approaches outperform the linear techniques in terms of both metrics. In these figures, we plotted the pairwise scatter plots of the nonlinear dimensionality reduction techniques, both t-SNE and UMAP. On the left side, we see the disease clusters colored based on the original diagnosis labels, and on the right side, we see the data-driven clusters derived by k-means clustering. In both methods, we see the depression samples are well separated from AD and MCI, although AD and MCI themselves are not easily distinguishable. We then analyzed the main differentiating feature categories between the disease clusters. These analyses consist of three main steps, which are explained in the following slides. Step 1. We applied the line for t-SNE interpretability method to locally explain t-SNE components. These figures depict an example of the local explanation of t-SNE embeddings for a selected depression instance. The figure on the right side is a zoom on the zone of interest for local explanation with projected samples in red. The figure on the left indicates the weight of the highly contributed features explaining each local dimension. Step 2. We randomly selected 10 HC samples from each cluster and 10 AD and 10 depression data points from the leftmost and rightmost clusters and applied line for t-SNE model to explain the local trends in their neighborhood. For each candidate sample, we generated a vector of length 9 indicating the total number of highly contributed features explaining trends per each feature category. We then applied man-with-the U-test to determine the distributions of which feature categories are significantly different between each pair of the selected disease groups. The differentiating feature categories between each pair of the disease groups are represented in this table. Interestingly, acoustic abnormality, discourse mapping indicating repetitiveness or circularity of a speech, lexical complexity and richness, word finding difficulty, and coherence are found to be the main differentiating symptoms between AD and depression disease clusters. To measure the effectiveness of our results, we use the main differentiating feature categories as a feature selection technique. We separately train MLP classifier on the following feature sets. F stands for all the hand-curated features. F sub D stands for main differentiating feature categories between AD and depression, and F excluding F sub D. Then we evaluated the models using tenfold cross-validation and reported macro average, accuracy, precision, recall, and F1 score across the tenfolds. Feature selection using only the differentiating feature categories significantly improved the classification performance in terms of all metrics. Also, excluding the differentiating feature categories significantly worsened the performance of the classification model. At a glance, here are our key findings in this work. Nonlinear clustering approaches outperform the linear techniques in distinguishing between distinct disease clusters. Acoustic abnormalities, variations in lexical complexity and richness, repetitiveness or circularity of a speech, word finding difficulty, and coherence impairment are the main differentiating symptoms between different kinds of dementia and depression. And lastly, data-driven differentiators are able to substantially improve performance of classification across diseases. Thanks for your attention.